Today we're going to talk about the legislative branch. You should be able to list the powers of the legislative branch and give me some examples of limited government. Specifically, how the legislative branch creates a limited government, how they limit the power of the executive branch, how they can limit the power of the judicial branch. Hit the timer! Remember, we've talked about the history and the creation of the U.S. government, mainly the ideas, the founding fathers, and the documents. And then in this unit, we're talking about, all right, let's see how those ideas work. Let's see how those ideas written in those documents, let's see how it works every single day. Remember, socialstudiesgames.us, a lot of content there that can help you out. Article 1 explains the legislative branch. That's what we're going to mainly focus on today. But as a reminder, remember, legislative branch, they write the laws. They write everything down. But just writing it down does not make it exist. That does not matter. There are a lot of things that are written down that people just ignore. There are libraries all over the country with a lot of words that you know nothing about that do not affect your life. The executive branch, as described in Article 2, they bring that law to life. They do everything that makes sure that written law exists, whether it's telling people what they can't do or what they get. For example, the legislative branch wrote a law called Medicare that says everyone over the age of 65 gets free health care. So just saying that, everybody gets free health care over 65. Okay, well, you got to actually bring it to life. You've got to do some things. So the executive branch mainly, and this is what they usually do, they spend a bunch of money to make that happen. They pay, like you go to the doctor, the executive branch, all right, here's your check, we'll pay for it. Oh, I'm sick again. The executive branch, here's the doctor. Or maybe they build the hospitals or whatever they have to set up to make sure that people over 65 get their health care. And then the judicial branch, as described in Article 3, they review those laws and make sure, hey, is that Medicare thing right? Can you do that? Does the government have the power to do that? Is it legal? And then they also will look another way of, do people break it? Hey, I'm getting denied my health care. And then the judicial branch will look at it. Yeah, he's getting denied his health care. We need to stop that. Someone's breaking the law, but whatever. That's probably not the best example, but you get the idea. The judicial branch interprets the laws, making sure the laws follow the Constitution, but they also determine if people are breaking the law. Today, we're focusing mainly on the legislative branch. This video is legislative branch. The next video will be executive branch, and then the next one will be the judicial branch. The legislative branch is also called Congress. Same thing. Article 1, legislative branch. We also call it Congress. Oh no, how many times? Today, just want to focus on this one, this idea. Representative government. That fundamental political principle, that basic government idea that our government was founded upon, it is explained and goes into great detail in Article 1 of the Constitution. If you take this idea like, well, where does this idea exist in the Constitution? Article 1 of our Constitution takes that idea and really brings it forward, brings it to life, puts it into practice. Legislative branch is broken into two separate houses. It is a bicameral house. That means two houses. The legislative branch, we have house number 1 called the House of Representatives. In that house, there are 435 members. How did you get that number? Where did all these people come from? It's based on the population of a state. If your state has a lot of people, meaning a lot of people need to be represented, so you get a lot of representatives in this house. If your state does not have very many people, so you don't need a bunch of representatives to represent them, so there's only a couple of representatives from your state in this house. North Carolina is not a lot of people. It's not very few people. Right in between, we get 13 representatives in this house to represent us. It's one member for every 700,000 people in your state. So for every 700,000 people in a state, there's one person selected to go to Washington, D.C., to work in this house, to write laws. For the Senate, the upper house, the more senior house in our Congress, you get 2 per state. The House of Representatives favors big population states, obviously, right? California, Texas, Florida, New York. A lot of people live in those states, and those people need to have more representatives so that it's equal. Those states have more influence in the House of Representatives because there's 435 members. and your membership is based on population, that means the big population states have a lot of power. That could be a problem. Now, again, it's not the size of the state. It's the number of people living in the state. So states like California, it's a big state, but they have a lot of people. Texas has a lot of people. Florida has a lot of people. New York have a lot of people in those states. When we go to Congress, that would mean, oh man, the big population states must run the show. That would be a problem. That's the reason we created a bicameral Congress. Yes, in the House of Representatives, the big population states have a lot of power, and that was set up in Article 1. But to fight back against that problem, the Senate, every state gets 2. So even the small population states have the same power of California. California, a lot of people in it, they only get 2. Wyoming, almost no one living in Wyoming, they get 2. So this is a way to even the balance between big population states and small population states. Small population states would have never agreed to the Constitution because they would have realized the big population states would always have all the power. So one of the things written in Article 1 to get people to agree to this Constitution, to get people to compromise, was we've got to give the small states something, the small population states. Now, it's not small size, remember, although for the most part it typically is, but the small population states, they got to get something so that they can agree to this Constitution. And so in our Constitution, we agreed to create a bicameral legislation where the small states also have some power, small population states. That way, they have to work together. If California can vote for a bunch of laws and always get their way in the House of Representatives, but they have to get the Senate to agree as well. And in that place, the small population states can step in and say, we don't like that law. You need to change it. No one has too much power. Big population states are evened out by small population states. Pretty equal. All this is written in Article 1. In Article 1, there are 2 types of power given to the legislative branch. They are the expressed or enumerated powers, and they are written. They are expressed. We can see those. There's a power. There's a power. And then we have the implied, meaning it's not written, but it's still there. It's kind of like reading between the lines. We've talked about these before. The elastic clause. Remember, everything that's written, they can do. And remember, Thomas Jefferson says he's a strict interpreter of the Constitution, saying if it's not written, if it's not expressed, if it's not enumerated, then we can't do it. Hamilton says, nah, if you look at this enumerated clause, it says that all laws which are necessary and proper, well, you kind of got to read between the lines, he says, with the Constitution. There's some of the things that aren't written, but they're implied and that we can do. And originally, that wasn't the way. Originally, it was just the express powers. But over time, especially because of Alexander Hamilton, we get the idea of an implied power. There are powers that are not written in there, but, they're kind of necessary and proper, and we've read between the lines, and we've added over time. And we've kind of stretched out the Constitution. So we have the stuff that's absolutely written and the stuff that's there, but it's not technically written there. How did we ever get there? Well, remember, the elastic clause says that the government has the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper, as long as those necessary and proper laws fall in line with the preamble. So there's the stuff that's written and the stuff that isn't written, and the stuff that isn't written, it's okay as long as it's necessary to do these things. If it's necessary to establish justice, then all right, you can do it. That implied power checks out. If it's necessary to provide domestic tranquility or peace, then all right, just because it's not written, you can do it. If it's necessary to protect us from other countries, then okay, you can do it. We know it's not written, but if it's necessary to make our life better, then all right, you can do it even though it's not written. Those are the implied powers, where we're really stretching out the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, the elastic clause, created the idea of the implied powers, or at least Alexander Hamilton's interpretation of that, especially for promoting the general welfare. Alexander Hamilton, loose interpretation, the banks. We created a bank. There isn't an express power that says we can create banks. There isn't an enumerated power that says the government can create banks. But there's an implied power because it's necessary to promote the general welfare. A bank is necessary for promoting the general welfare, and so we have the elastic clause. This is an implied power. The stuff that isn't written, but the government still can do it. Now, the express powers, this is the easy to understand. It's written there. It's in black and white. It's written in the Constitution. You can pull the Constitution up right now and find out. The power to write laws is in the Constitution. The power to make people pay taxes, it's written in Article 1. The legislative branch can create taxes. Boom. We now have it. Also, they have approval power. This is an example of checks and balances. This is a way that the legislative branch can put the executive branch in check. They can limit the power of the judicial branch or the executive, and they can limit the power of the judicial branch by exercising their approval power, and this is an expressed power. This is written in the U.S. Constitution. They have the approval power when it comes to the budget. Now, you might have a monthly budget, right? If you make $2,500 a month, maybe you spend so much on rent, you spend so much on your car payment, TV, internet, insurance, groceries, utilities, whatever. Everyone has a monthly budget. The government has a U.S. budget. If they have a $2.5 trillion income, that's mainly through taxes, they have to create a budget. How much they spend on military, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, government costs. So there's a budget. Guess who has to approve that budget? Maybe like in your house, dad or mom, someone has the power to create the budget and someone has to approve the budget. I don't know what it's like in your house, but in the U.S. government, the legislative branch has final say on the spending. You want to spend $900 billion on the military? They get to say yes or no. You want to spend $500 billion on Medicaid, $300 billion on Medicare? They get to say yes or no. The executive branch creates, all right, the executive branch, the president, they decide, oh, I want to spend this much on that and that on this, and I want to buy $5 million worth of bombs. I want to spend $5 million on Band-Aids for Medicaid. I want to spend $3 billion on prescription drugs. They decide how much is going to be spent. But they don't have final say because we have a government that has checks and balances. They limit each other's power. The legislative branch has approval. They get to approve. Notice how when you go approve, you make an L for legislative. That helps you remember that the legislative branch has approval power. The budget must be approved by the legislative branch. If they say no, then the executive branch has to create a new budget. It's a way that they limit each other's power and they work together. They also have approval power of judges. If you want to be in a Supreme Court justice, you have to be approved by the legislative branch. The executive branch picks a judge, but that judge, or justice is what we call them, has to be approved by the legislative branch. If they say no, then you don't work there. They have approval power. This is an expressed power in Article 1. The executive branch picks the guy, but if they say no, not gonna happen. Approval power. The executive branch, the president and the vice president, pick cabinet members. All these people, remember we talked about Ray LaHood, we talked about Arnie Duncan, Timmy Geithner, Hillary Clinton, Panetta, all heads of different departments of government, education, treasury, transportation, secretary of state. They were all picked by him. Well, guess what? They all have to be approved by them. The legislative branch has approval power. It's an expressed power. If they say no, then you got to pick somebody else. They have to learn to work together to pick the people that all the branches agree upon. Declaring war, that's the legislative branch's power, not the president. The legislative branch gets to declare war. December 8th, 1941, the legislative branch voted yes, we're going to go to war with Japan. This is the day after the Pearl Harbor attack. The president can't just declare war. They have to get the legislative branch to approve it. Limited government. This is an all example of checks and balances. If the executive wants war, the legislative gets to say yes or no. If they say no, then yeah! Right? It's like a karate kick. It's the way that I don't know if it's like a karate kick. Yeah, it's like a karate kick. It's not a karate kick. But this is in a way that they can smack them, put them in place. You can't do whatever you want. Remember the picture. Limited government, the person with the dog on a leash. This is a way the government limits each other. The legislative branch steps in. A lot of people today are freaked out about the president. He's going to get us in another war. No, he's not. A basic understanding of Article 1 of the Constitution lets you know that the legislative branch has the power to say no to war. So everybody chill out. Calm down. The Founding Fathers figured this out. That's why we're going over the fundamental political principles. That's why we went over the significant documents. That's why we study this. Too many Americans didn't watch this video you watched right now, and they're freaking out on Twitter and Instagram, and we're going to go to war. No, we're not. The legislative branch has the power to declare war, not the president. Everybody calm down. Everything's going to be good. The founding fathers thought of all this. They didn't know who the president is today, but they kind of thought about, well, how could things go bad? All right, yeah, that's bad. Let's try to put in place procedures that prevent nonsense from ever happening. And guess what? It's worked so far. 200 and almost 50 years, the Constitution's working pretty good. Implied powers, we might talk about those in another video, but we've gone over them enough. Express powers, implied powers, limited government. Turn off the time. 15 minutes. List the powers of the legislative branch. I'm not going to go over them all, but we went over a bunch of express powers, and we also went over the idea of some implied powers. I can't really list the implied powers because they're not literally written down. They are not enumerated. They're not expressed. They're in between the lines.